anti-white nationalism?
I mean, what this kind? Who are you with? Which it's Washington Post. All right, so potato. Okay. Of course, I condemn any form of vicious racial discrimination in this country, but I think that the presumption of your question is fundamentally based on a falsehood that really is the main form of racial discrimination we see in this country today. Institutionalized racism is institutionalized racial discrimination that we see that doesn't come from somehow discriminating against people on the basis of some tenet of white supremacy. It's based on affirmative action. It's based on actually discriminating against people on the color of their skin in a way that's actually institutionalized today. Was there a point in our history, at points in our prior national history, where there have been vicious forms of anti-black or anti-brown discrimination throughout this country after the Civil War and otherwise? Yes. But you're looking in the rearview mirror and using that to pose a question today that is so far removed from what the reality is in America today. This myth of white supremacy, the closest you can find is Jussie Smollett, where you all were actually, speaking of trust in the media, jumping up and down over some false narrative. The best way you're able to find your best instance of white supremacy was a guy who was actually paying his other fellow people to be actually staging something that didn't happen. And so stop picking on this farce of some figment that exists at some infinitesimally small fringe of the American public today to open our eyes to the actual real threats that we face. And I think that it's frankly questions and framings like that that has caused the American public to lose all trust in the mainstream media, I'm sorry to say, for good reason.
But first, gang, our good friend Mike Lindell needs your help. Mike is one of the strongest patriots working tirelessly for the America First and MAGA movements in this country, and also happens to be a very close friend to this channel, as you know. From election integrity to protecting American businesses, Mike really does it all. And now, as the cabal of deep state lawyers and election machine companies are trying to take Mike down with frivolous lawsuits, he needs your support more than ever. Mike recently said he was going to fight every lawsuit until he wins and will never settle out of court with people who help rig the election. So, with this in mind, I want to remind you about the incredible MyPillow deals Mike is offering with my promo code Turley. Now, if you just click on the link in my description below, you can save well over 60% on all sorts of incredible MyPillow products. Of course, Mike is offering huge savings on the new and improved MyPillow 2.0. But gang, I would also recommend hugely Mike's My Slippers, as well as his amazingly comfortable bed sheets. These are some of the comfiest slippers and sheets I've ever owned. In fact, I would use that word to describe all of MyPillow's products. Comfy to the maximum. So don't wait, gang. Support Mike as he fights for election integrity and gets some extremely comfy things to boot. It's a win-win. Don't wait. Click on that link below or go to mypillow.com/Turley right now. Now, that was a brilliant answer. He was asked by this ultra-leftist Washington Post reporter if he denounced white supremacy, and Vivek pushed back. And this is really important. This is important whenever you and I are engaging with someone on the left, or frankly, in any disagreement for that matter. He pushed back by challenging the actual premise upon which the question was based. So this is something that's very, very important for us to always bear in mind. Every single question is based on an assumption. Every single question that we ask is based on an assumption. It's based on a premise that's assumed to be valid prior to the question. So for you New Testament fans, you'll notice when Christ is asked a question, he almost always responds with another question, right? Good master, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Why do you call me good? Only God is good, right? Are you calling me God, right? You see, Christ is always getting the questioner to open up within his own assumptions. And that's precisely what Vivek just did there. He brought to the surface the assumption behind the question. The assumption being that white supremacy is the dominant force in contemporary racial discrimination in our nation. White supremacy is the dominant force in contemporary racial discrimination. And Vivek explicitly tore that assumption to shreds. And he did it in two ways. Did you notice that? He challenged the notion itself by citing the reverse discrimination inherent in affirmative action and DEI programs that are systemically infused throughout our nation's institutions. That is precisely where even the Supreme Court has ruled. That is precisely where we are overtly seeing systemic racism, systemic efforts to deliberately discriminate against people on the basis of race. Okay. It's affirmative action. It's DEI. It's not white supremacy. So that's his first challenge of that premise. And then secondly, he shattered the assumption by pointing out that the single most touted example of white supremacy, shouted from the rooftops 24/7 by the legacy media, was the Jussie Smollett race hoax. The single most touted example of white supremacy from the last 2 years, according to legacy media, was a blatant fraud. He could have added the whole media-induced hoax surrounding the Covenant Catholic school kids as well. So take note exactly what Vivek just did there. Again, we're expanding our brain power here. He brought to the surface the very assumption upon which the question was based. Do you denounce white supremacy? So he brought to the surface the assumption that white supremacy is the single primary driving force in contemporary racism today. And then he dismantled that assumption by demonstrating that it's actually affirmative action DEI that's the primary means of systemic racial discrimination, and that this reporter's assumption about white supremacy was actually based largely on a hoax. Now, despite that, rather than recognizing that her very premise of her question was just dismantled and destroyed, so what she would need to do in order to recover, in order for the question to not self-destruct, she would need to defend that premise now. She would need to say, oh, no, au contraire. No, it's not DEI and affirmative action. No, we have evidence that white supremacy is the primary means of racial discrimination by A, B, C, and D, whatever it is, right? Rather than defend that premise, I kid you not, what this Washington Post reporter did, supposedly the guardian of democracy and truth, what she did is she re-asked the question. Check it out.
I'm not going to recite some catechism for you. I'm against vicious racial discrimination in this country. So I'm not pledging allegiance to your new religion of modern wokeism, which actually fits the test. I'm not going to bend the knee to your religion. I'm sorry. I'm not asking you to bend the knee to mine, and I'm not going to bend the knee to yours. But do I condemn vicious racial discrimination? Yes, I do. Am I going to play your silly game of gotcha? No, I'm not. And frankly, this is why people have lost trust. And I know you're going to go print the headline tomorrow. I already know this. We already know how your game works. Vivek Ramaswamy refuses to condemn white supremacy because you asked a stupid question. The reality is, I condemn vicious racial discrimination in this country, but the kind of vicious and systematic racial discrimination we see today is discrimination on the basis of race in a very different direction. You want to know what the best way is to end discrimination on the basis of race? Stop discriminating on the basis of race. Do that, and we're going to move this country forward. And I don't care whether you're black or white or brown or anything in between. That's how we're going to unite this country. You people have been responsible for dividing this country to a breaking point, creating a projection of national division. I meet people from the south side of Chicago to meetings like this one of every shade of melanin, multiple, from man to woman, doesn't make a difference, who are hungry for reviving unity in this country. And you, with your catechism that you try to get to politicians to whatever fake headline you're going to print on the basis of this conversation tomorrow, that's what's dividing this country to a breaking point. Shame on you. Look people in the eye and tell them what you've actually failed to tell them for the last 5 years. Own the accountability for your own failures as the media. That's how we rebuild trust in this country. And until then, I don't have a lot of patience to play the games.
What do you expect from
Hear, 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 hear. Now, you won't believe, well, yes, you will. Yes, you will. You will believe this. That reporter, that silly, pathetic excuse of a member of the press, actually went on and did precisely what Vivek predicted she would do. She literally tweeted out that Vivek Ramaswamy refused to condemn white supremacy. It even got fact check on Twitter. It was so ridiculous. I mean, that's your mainstream legacy media right there in a snapshot. That's what they try to pass off as objective news coverage. The whole premise of the question was objectively blown apart. And yet she continued to double down on a totally refuted premise. Now, she was not alone. Enter NBC. Now, this is NBC's Dasha Burns. I believe it's the following day. She's trying to save face for the propaganda press, for the woke legacy media in light of that obvious train wreck. Check it out.
Talk about what white supremacy and what happened last night for a moment, because when you were talking to reporters last night, you called white supremacy a myth. When someone asked you about Dylan Roof, you said you didn't know who that is. Have you looked up what happened in 2015?
Yeah, look, I said this last night. Invidious racial discrimination is wrong no matter how it happens. But if a Washington Post reporter is asking me almost like a catechism, whatever question I said, I'm against invidious racial discrimination, whatever form it takes, but says, do you denounce white supremacy? It's incumbent on us for us to define what white supremacy is. I wrote my book, Woke Inc., and I've written about the detailed understanding of what the popular understanding of these terms have come to mean. Do you believe punctuality is a vestige of white supremacy, Dasha?
Look,
because if you don't, then you have a disagreement about many of the people who are defining those terms, or the written word, or the use, or the nuclear family. These aren't my words. These are the words of intellectual proponents from Ibram Kendi to the Ayanna Presleys to BLM that have said these are vestiges of white supremacy. So
Mr.
we can't have it both ways.
What you do, though,
we have to have
you
an
choose,
honest
you
discussion.
Straw man arguments.
This is not a straw man.
You brought up Jussie Smollett.
It is not a straw man. Now, this is why this NBC reporter, Dasha Burns, is so obviously out of her league here. This is so ironic. What you just saw there was so ridiculously ironic that only a woke moron can't see what happened there. Note what Vivek said. If you're going to ask me to denounce white supremacy, it is incumbent for you, the questioner, to define your terms. Now, defining terms is argumentation debate 101. Okay, Aristotle's classic logic work begins with the necessity of defining one's terms, and you do that in order to avoid what's called the fallacy of equivocation. Equivocation is when you end up using the same word in different ways. So that's one of the reasons why people end up arguing past each other, because they're actually operating with different definitions of the same word or term. So Vivek demanding definitional specificity and then giving examples of why we need that definitional specificity, right? He asked us, so do you think punctuation is white supremacy? Do you think the nuclear family is white supremacy? Because that's precisely what BLM thinks, right? Is that what you're talking about? You see, his demand for definitional specificity is the very prerequisite for rational debate. How did this reporter, Dasha Burns, how did she respond to that? Think about it. How did she respond to that demand, to that argument for defining our terms? She responded by accusing Vivek of putting forward a straw man argument. Now, if you don't know what a straw man is, it's very simple. A straw man is taking someone's argument and then sort of, what do you want to call it? Deliberately misrepresenting it. How's that? Right? A straw man is actually fabricating and misrepresenting an argument in order to tear it down, in order to debunk it. So if I say, I love the color blue, and then someone else says, so you hate the color red then, huh? That's a straw man, right? It's a deliberate misrepresentation of a person's argument in order to bash it. What did Dasha Burns just do there? Vivek puts forward a perfectly legitimate demand for her to define her terms. And what did she recast that argument into? She recast that perfectly legitimate argument as a straw man. Which means what? What did she just engage in? She just engaged in the very definition of a straw man. By recasting Vivek's perfectly legitimate call to define her terms as a straw man argument, she's engaging in the very straw man tactics she's accusing Vivek of. I mean, talk about projection, my gosh. So this is why this NBC hack reporter, this Dasha Burns, this is why she's so obviously out of her league in this interview. She appears completely ignorant of the very basics of logical debate. And guess what? It just goes downhill from there. Check it out.
Best
Jussie
example of
Smollett
white
was the hottest thing in
supremacy.
news in the back of a fake actual attack on him that we have to contend with. This is actually,
and yet you have
look at the
examples like the
federal law
Buffalo
enforcement's
shooter
data.
in New York just in
Cherry-picked.
2022.
You have other
but
examples.
you are also cherry picking when you bring up Jussie
So
Smollett.
I'll look at all of the statistics. More black on black
Absolutely.
crime. If you really care about actual crime against black Americans, let's get to the root causes of it in the inner cities of this
Look,
country.
the Anti-Defamation League tracked a 38% increase in white supremacist propaganda last year.
Who's tracking that?
The Anti-Defamation League.
Yeah, the ADL, I don't think is a particularly credible source
So
when
who
they
are
have
we
a
supposed to
cherry-picked
look to
information.
when we're talking about
I would
this?
suggest
Oh, man. 911. 911. I'd like to report a murder. I mean, this is a slaughter. Did you hear what she just said, what she admitted? She cites the ADL as a race authority. The weaponized ADL. I mean, let that hear. Even the legacy media has called out organizations like the ADL and the SPLC as nothing more than race huckster organizations that weaponize race and racial accusations in order to and to shake down the accused. Elon Musk is currently suing the ADL, ironically, for defamation. She's citing a notoriously disreputable left-wing organization that routinely weaponizes race for its own financial gain as an authority on racial issues. And Vivek calls her out on it. And then she explicitly admits that without the ADL, without left-wing authorities, she has no case. She has no argument. Who else are we going to look to talk about things like this? Let's go back to the very left-wing organizations that generate this propaganda in the first place. You get rid of them, then who are we going to look to? You see, once again, Vivek just exposed this hack of a reporter for engaging in yet another logical fallacy, which is known as an appeal to authority. Okay, appealing to authority. That assumes an issue is valid because some authority claims it is. I mean, we saw this all throughout the COVID insanity. We trust the experts. We trust the science. No, you're trusting in logical fallacies. Just because a supposed authority or expert says something is true does not make it true. They're not divine. You're going to have to corroborate it. I'm going to call you out. Why is it that they say this is true? Give me the methodology behind that conclusion. So that's what Vivek did. Vivek said, I don't buy those standards of evaluation. I don't, but the ADL isn't authoritative. Why are you throwing that out to me? Oh, why not cite, medical statistics from Philip Morris Marlboro cigarettes? I don't buy it. You're going to have to do better than that. And what does she have? The moment he pulls the rug out from under her feet, she's got nothing because she's admitting she's been appealing to authority. But Vivek wasn't done with her. In many ways, he's just getting warmed up.